Hi, Lene Rachel Andersen. So you are the author of this book, The Nordic Secrets. We have already spoke a little about the Nordic secret in the previous video, but we are going to go ahead and more in detail. So first idea, the Nordic secret is the fact that you have a folk culture, a culture who are really shared by all the population, and people can make sense of what happened in the society, and each person can participate to the elaboration of solution.
Yeah.
When we say this, first question, is it really all the society, or it is a percentage more larger than in other society?
I mean, we have, first of all, I need to say that I co-wrote this with a Swedish colleague, Thomas Björkman. But the Nordic countries have been really good at getting education
to everybody.
But not just education, also access to public libraries and theater and enculturation, culture.
Yeah.
And for...
And it means also access to creativity? Does it mean to make sense? I mean, do you have courses about how you question?
Yeah, I mean, we have a tradition where you're encouraged to ask questions. And we started that in 1851, which, I mean, in 1851, that was radical.
Yes.
And it was not the city youth. This was the farmhands who went to folk high schools, not just high schools, because the bourgeoisie had high schools for their sons. But this was the folksy high school for the farmhands, the young farmers. And when they got a chance to go there 170 years ago, that was radical and new. And I mean, you know the feudal society of France, and you know what poverty was like in the countryside, and you know what it's like to have an agricultural society where there's not opportunities for everybody. So imagine that you're an 18-year-old farmhand. Your father has a farm and your uncle has a farm, and they may have put a little bit of money aside. And now there's this new kind of school where you can go away for 3 to 5 months, and you can study literature, history, do a lot of singing of new songs. That was the YouTube videos in the old days. You can learn new science, and you learn about your country. You become better at your handwriting skills, and you learn new agricultural techniques. So does that sound fun? Yes, it does. If your only other prospect was to till somebody else's soil until you had saved up enough money to buy your own farm and get married. So now you can go away for 3 to 5 months. And there are other young people your age, not girls. I mean, the schools were separate. Folk high schools for women started in the 1880s, I think. But this was really new and appealing. And when we get to 1900, about perhaps 10% of the rural population had been to one of these folk high schools in their youth. And they went back to their local communities and became the community organizers who created the cooperative dairy farms and the cooperative grocery stores and the egg hatcheries and the insurance companies and social security systems for, I mean, when you get sick or need help from the doctor or anything. So all these cooperatives sort of mushroomed up in the rural population in Denmark from the 1870s and onwards. And this is very much related to this extra education that you could get in your youth. And it inspired the other young people, even though they didn't go to one of these folk high schools. It was like, hey, there's somebody here who takes responsibility, who organizes things that are interesting, who can speak up, not just for themselves, but for the entire community, and they can stand up to maybe the pastor or the local landlords and the other people and powerful people in society. So they have this sort of, they carry themselves in a different way. And so that's what I mean, it was a handful of really clever school teachers and pastors and and farmers who wanted something better for their sons and daughters than they had had. So it was also self-organized in the countryside. And in the beginning, it got a bit of funding from the government, but the government kept their hands off it. So it was really, the schools defined the curriculum, and it was a learning environment, a teaching environment where the young people were encouraged to ask questions. And maybe not exactly question authority, but question the truths and the assumptions that everybody was carrying around. So if you have a society that organizes, maybe not around it, but has a lot of that at what you would call the bottom of society, you lift society. And we were talking about happiness. I don't think that the top level of Danish society or Swedish or Norwegian society is particularly happier than the top part of French society, but there's a misery at the bottom that we don't have. So we've lifted and our society from the bottom, and we have eliminated a certain level of misery at the bottom, and then on average the level of happiness will go up. And there's a sense of empowerment to this as well.
Yes, I can feel this in Nordic countries, this empowerment of everybody to do the best he can. But does that mean that you don't have poor people? Or?
Oh, we do, but I certainly hope that I know that we don't have the kind of poverty that you see in other places. There's an economic safety net. I won't say it's perfect, and I don't think we're actually improving it at the moment, but we have created institutions, we have created good governance, we have created a culture not just of trust, but of responsibility. And my colleague and I are convinced that that comes from this extra education in your young adulthood, because what those schools were about and what they are still about and what is very much part of Danish education is that you become a team player in society, not just an obedient team player, but a thinking, creative, questioning team player who cares about their society.
Yes, so you consider that as a Nordic secret. It is a kind of folk Bildung, and they come from this concept of Bildung, who are already in Germany, but more for the elite, for the most educated people. They are used to have a strong Bildung. So can you explain what is this idea of Bildung? Bildung is to participate to the discussion in a way, it's on a large-scale society level.
It is, it is education, basic education. It is also the knowledge you need in order to be an active citizen. So in our society, it would be like, do you have a driver's license? Do you know how to book a train ticket online? You have to be able to function in society. But then it's also emotional and moral maturity. Do you take responsibility? Do you have a conscience towards your society, towards your local communities? Do you self-organize some of the solutions that you need to have around you? And do you engage in local politics, in party politics, and in all kinds of associations, and take responsibility where you are? So Bildung has, and then it's also very much connected to that specific culture where you are. You can be a professor with Bildung here in France, but if you were suddenly dropped off in the middle of Greenland among the Inuits, all your education might not be worth that much, so you wouldn't be very builded in that context. So it's really also connected to context and to cultural heritage. And there is no functioning country that does not have Bildung at some level. So it's not a Nordic secret in the way that we're the only ones who have it, or that nobody else does. It's that we have a language for it, and we've created institutions for it for a very long time.
Yes, thank you. And of course, now the question is how you build a Bildung in a complex world where you have multi-appartenance, multi-identity, and you don't know exactly who you are, and which society are you part for with the globalization, the local, same time local and global. So can you speak about this? I think it is part of your next book.
It is, and this book is about the history of how we created Nordic societies that have been functioning so well during industrialization. Now the industrialization and the industrialized society is being replaced by something else, a globalized digital economy. And we have not developed the Bildung for that or the institutions for that. So we are in the same position as we were in Europe 200 years ago, when we had all those farmers, peasants who were used to the feudal society and the power structures of the feudal society, and suddenly you have the steam engine and industrialization and a new kind of globalization, and the old power structures could not handle that. And so in France you had revolution, in Germany and all over Europe you ended up with Napoleonic Wars and a mess for 150 years until the end of World War II. And then we finally figured it out after the Second World War, and now we're changing the structures and the technologies again, and we need a new kind of Bildung, education, taking responsibility, and we need it throughout society. I think that 150 years ago there was an awareness that the top level of society, that was the traditional, we need education for the top, and then you have the peasants. Then we turned it around and it was like, oh, now we need to educate the bottom of society. And we kind of forget that the top of society needs to understand the local culture, needs to understand the local meaning making. You need policymakers in France who think the French way and care about France. And we need policymakers in Denmark who think in Danish and care about Denmark. And then at the European level, we need to meet with the shared European consciousness and conscience and the shared European meaning making. And we are just barely beginning to develop that sense of Europeanness and putting it into concepts and words. We've created the legal structure, but it's not very meaningful to a lot of people, and that's a problem. So we need new meaning making that is at the European level. We also need national meaning making that meets the demands of the world we're creating with our new technologies.
Thank you, Lene Rachel Andersen. So you are the author of the Nordic Secret, and we are going to explore more your ideas in the next video about a kind of a meta-paradigmatic culture for the future, yes, and the world more and more complex.